The airbrush is something that I've always been fascinated by, and I have found that it is really an effective tool for spray painting just about anything in the shop. Unless you're spray painting a car or a house or something, this is just about the best thing that you can ever lay your hands on. And I've used it on quite a few projects, and I'll show you a couple things at the very end. What I'll be covering today are the advantages and disadvantages, which one to use, where you can get it, what you have to have in the way of an air compressor, the controls and connections to it, how it works, how you change the tip and the needle. You're going to have to do that. What paint to use, that's one of the biggies. Which paint do you use? And here's the big one. How do you thin the paint? That's the big mystery in all of this. And then I'll finish up by spray painting some real stuff, and you can see how you could actually apply this to anything in your shop. The airbrush is so precise that you can use it to paint the cabinet. I used it to paint the cabinet of my Ranger. But it's also so precise and so controllable that you can paint a screw with it. I mean a single screw. You can get it down to where you can precisely paint a single screw. Way ahead of a can of spray paint. I remember the times, in the past when I tried to use a can of spray paint. That's just plain nuts, okay? You can use any kind of paint you want with it, which means that the paint cost is very, very low. You can mix custom colors if you have to. I haven't tried to match original colors in radio, but that could be done. And I'll be honest with you, it's just plain fun. I like to find an excuse to use the airbrush. It really is such a fun thing to use. The disadvantages, okay, there's always a disadvantage. It requires you to buy the airbrush, and you got to buy an air compressor. Now, in my case, I already had an air compressor in the house. I had a relatively large one in the shop, and so I already had that. And when you go to use it, it requires a little bit of setup. But I have a piece of paper that I keep in my toolbox with the airbrush, and I just pull that piece of paper out, and whenever I'm going to do a job, I just gather everything up I need, and away I go. So it really isn't that difficult to use. The airbrush, the only airbrush that I recommend is the Paasche VL Airbrush. There are many wonderful airbrush manufacturers out there. Latta is one, there's quite a few. But the Paasche VL, and don't confuse it with the VLS and the V. The VL is the one you want. It is probably the iconic airbrush, which means if you mention airbrush to somebody who's seen an airbrush, this is probably the one that they are familiar with. Okay, it's relatively inexpensive, easy to find. Anybody that carries airbrushes is going to carry the VL. It's that simple. Okay, you can spray just about any media with it. Okay. Some airbrushes are made only for really fine art. Some are made for makeup. Okay, if you guys want to use it for makeup. Okay, but ladies buy them for makeup. The accessories are readily available. The bottles and all the parts are all available. If ever you need a part, I've never needed a part. They're all available. It's been around for years, and it's the only one I recommend simply because I know it works. If you've got another one, well, you can try it. But then you're kind of on your own as far as getting it to work, okay? What you want to do when you buy it is you want to buy the set. Typically, there's a set that includes the airbrush, actually, it comes with 3 needles, one of them installed, and all the other goodies that you're going to need. You're going to need the wrench, you're going to need the color cup, you're going to need the bottles, you're going to need the hose, you're going to need just about everything here, so you might as well buy it. Let's move this up. You might as well buy it as a set. If you like a nice storage box, you can get it in a nice storage box, but it runs you about 30 bucks for that box. But you want to get a VL set, okay? Be sure, because there's different sets. be sure to get the one that has the color cup and the bottle with the nipple on it that attaches to the airbrush. You're going to need this. You're going to need the color cup. I think I found some sets that don't include those. And also, it's not a bad idea, because of shipping costs. As everybody knows, shipping costs can add substantially to something. If you buy an extra color cup and an extra bottle with a nipple on it, this one in particular is really, really useful to have the extras. They're not real expensive, but if you try and buy them on their own and you have to pay the shipping with them, well, that drives the thing up. The place to buy this is at a local art store. Some automotive custom shops might have them, but the airbrush is really considered an art item, and so you're going to find it in art stores and maybe bigger stores. I don't know if Lowe's has anything, but it's really an art item, and so that's probably where you're going to be able to find it. Okay, you're going to need a source of air, and here the options can go all over the place. You can buy a small compressor for a very reasonable price. The problem here is that it runs constantly. Whenever you're spraying, it's going to run. Some of them are auto shut off, which means as soon as you push down on the button on the airbrush, the compressor turns on, and then when you stop, it shuts off. That's kind of nice because the noise is often a problem. You can get one with a small tank. And in this case, it runs for a bit, then it shuts off, and while you're using the air in the tank, it's quiet. I happen to have a big compressor in the shop. I had it there already. I just run a air line from that to a local regulator, and once that baby is full, that thing is horrendously loud. You can't hear yourself think when it's filling. But once it's full, I can go all day and spray and never hear a peep out of it, okay? Another thing you're going to need is you need a regulator and a dryer. The airbrush runs at about 20 pounds per square inch. Some of these regulators go up to 150, and they don't give you much resolution down at the bottom end where you're really working at. But you do have to have that in the dryer. And many times, you can see over here, it comes with the compressor. And I think I went down the aisle, I think that was a Lowe's, and I found they had a bunch of air stuff there. You go down to the air tool aisle in a big store, they just got loads and loads and loads of stuff. Which one you use is up to you. Things that you might not know about if you haven't been into the air tool scene is they have quick disconnect and connect connectors. If you use a female connector, when you unplug the tool, it shuts off the air. So if you put this on the end of your air hose, you can plug tools in and unplug tools without turning the air off. What I have is a big pressure gauge and a big regulator mounted on the wall right near the airbrush with a male connector on it like this, and then I come and I plug the air into it whenever I'm going to be doing airbrushing. All right, and then I can unplug it and get the hose out of the way when I'm not airbrushing. I also have a female outlet on here so that when I'm in an airbrush, I plug in the airbrush. You can see the male connector here is on the airbrush hose. I plug it into the air supply, and then I can dial in here whatever pressure I use. I run 20, and then I run about 5 when I'm cleaning it, as you'll see at the end of this talk, okay? But the compressor, man, I don't know how many different ways you can go. If you buy a compressor from someone who sells airbrushes, and if it's a compressor made for an airbrush, like one of these smaller ones, let me go back, what you'll find often is these cost a little bit more, but they're quieter. You buy a cheap one, the cheaper ones generally are noisier. So that's the trade-off, okay? And of course, if you get a large one or already have one, you're set. But you do have to have an air source in as well. And it is completely possible that they have these tanks that you can get for your shop that you can fill up from your air compressor for taking it out and doing your tires. There's no reason you can't use that to temporarily hold air but I don't think it'll run very long, but that is another possible option. Okay. Here's what the airbrush looks like. It's only about this long. It's about that long, as you'll see when I handle it. And here on the left is where the paint and the air come out. It's got a place where the paint goes in, a paint where the air goes in, and then of course the nozzle is where the air comes out. And then this is what is known as a double action airbrush. It means that, this is what makes it so wonderful, is that you can turn the air off and on independently of the paint. And once you turn the paint on, or once you turn the air on, you can control exactly how much paint you mix in with the air. So it's possible to turn on the air and have no paint whatsoever come out. When you draw back on the lever, it starts to add more and more paint into the outlet stream. For the push down, it's off or on. You don't try and partially do it like you might try to do with the spray can. It's either off or it's on. If you want to control the air, you go back to the regulator and you turn that up or down. But generally, you set that to about 20 pounds per square inch and you leave it. Okay? So this thing allows you very precise control of the amount of paint that comes out of here. As you're going to see, you can write your name with the airbrush, or you can cover an entire cabinet of a piece of radio equipment. Now, how does this baby work? Well, being a microscopist and loving to do close-up, here's the business end of it. It has, in the end, a tip that fits in different sizes. There's a needle that fits into that tip and blocks it off, and then there are a couple of caps that cover it. We're looking right in the end, and here in the right picture, you can see the hole in the middle. That's where the arrow or the needle has been pulled out all the way. The air comes out in this annular ring around that. You can see that round circle about the center dot. That's where the air comes out. Nothing happens out here. That's just part of the construction. And so what happens is, with the needle in, as you see it here, air comes out, but no paint. And then as you pull back, you can see here that you've pulled the needle in a little bit. Paint comes out of there and is mixed with the ring of air around it, and that produces a cone of air that comes out the end of the airbrush. It comes out in a cone shape. If you move in, you can paint a tiny dot. If you move out, you can paint a swath maybe 3 inches wide. And that's what gives it the control, okay? These needles come in 3 sizes. If you get the set, you get all 3 of them. Think about it here. The paint has to come out in that little region between the needle in the middle and what's left of the hole. You never actually run it like here on the right. In this case, it would just blob out. But when the needle is partially in there, the paint comes out through that gap. You have to thin the paint so that it will come out through that gap. Okay? And so you can't just take paint right out of the can and stuff it in there and spray it. You got to thin it down. As you're going to see, that isn't that hard. Okay? It's not that hard. All right? What you got to do here, first of all, is you have to change the needle. When you buy it, it comes with the number 3 set. There's a needle, there's a tip, and there's an air cap. And this is the first of several videos, many videos actually, that I shot for this program. This video will show you how to change it, and you can also see a little bit how it works. Now, I can't hear the video playing. Let me know right away if you don't hear it, but it should be playing. So here we go. Here's the video. If we want to spray heavier paints with the airbrush, we need to change out the air cap, the tip which is inside, and the needle. We need to make these a larger size. They come in a number 1, a number 3, and a number 5. We need a number 5. Chances are, if you bought the kit, that a number 3 is already installed. You can tell what's installed by looking at the number of ridges that are scribed on the air cap. This one has 3 lines. That means it's a number 3. To change these out, it's very easy. The first thing you do is you remove the handle. Just screw it off. that. You can tell also that this is a number 3 needle because there are 3 notches on the end of the needle. Loosen the collar here, just like that, and then simply pull the needle out. Don't put the new needle back in yet. Next, we have to remove the air cap. It's probably tightened on there just a little bit, so a pair of pliers will gently loosen it, and then you can remove it. Do this carefully over a tabletop so that we don't have the anything falling onto the floor. Next, we take the wrench that came with the set and loosen the air cap body. And then we can remove it just like that. And then we have the tip underneath, which just pulls right out like that. The new tip and the new air cap come in a little container like this. You find the one that's a number 5, and we can put it in here just like that. And then we put the air cap body back on. This is independent of the size. The same air cap body is used for all of them. And we tighten that into place with the wrench. Just gently, don't overdo it. And then we put on the number 5 air cap. Don't cross thread it. Make sure it goes on smoothly. And just to make sure it stays in place, we can use our pair of pliers and very, very gently tighten it like that. Then we take the number 5 needle, and you can tell this is a number 5 needle because it has 5 notches on it there, little marks on it. We simply slide that in. There's an internal washer, you have to push it through and then gently push it until it seats right in the front there. Just closes the hole, and then tighten the clutch here to hold it in place like that. You can check to make sure that when you pull the lever back, the needle moves in and out, and then put the handle back on. And now you're ready to go with heavier paints. Moving on. What paint do you want to use? Well, you don't want to use latex paint, not because you can't spray it in the airbrush, but because it's not durable enough for radio equipment. Okay? Lacquer, you don't want to use that either. It's explosive. It's very dangerous unless you really know what you're doing. You don't want to use lacquer. I'll use lacquer thinner to clean things, but only then I'm outside or I have a special fan on. So stay away from lacquer. I use oil-based enamel. Rust-Oleum is readily available. Valspar farm and implement paint can be found at many stores, and virtually every hardware store has got its own brand of enamel. Okay, so all of those can be used. You want to use an oil-based enamel. Okay. The most mysterious process, I think, of this whole airbrush thing is how do you thin the paint? Now, in the video following, I make comments about how to do it, and I want you to ignore those, but you're going to have that anyway, because I found a better way to do it. I use teaspoons. You get yourself a measuring set with a teaspoon, a tablespoon, half a teaspoon, quarter teaspoon. I work in small amounts of paint, very small amounts of paint. Okay, the amount of thinner is important, and it changes from paint to paint. It's not constant with a brand. It changes from color to color, and so you have to do it by experiment. If you have too little paint, it runs and it won't cover right. Too much paint and it won't go through. So I found a way to figure out the proper ratio. What I do is I take 3 teaspoons of paint and 3 teaspoons of thinner, and you'll see them here. I mix them together into a little bottle, and I just stir it with a little teaspoon. Okay, You load up the airbrush with a small sample of this, and I'll be showing you how to do that, and you spray it. You spray it around and see how it behaves. It might be just right. For some paints, that's just right. Others, it's too thin. If it's too thin, then carefully measure out another teaspoon and dump it in so you have 4 to 3. Mix, mix, mix. Spray out whatever's left in the airbrush. Put whatever's left in the airbrush back into the bottle, and then spray it out onto a napkin or a paper towel so that you spray it out of the airbrush. Put the new mixture in, and you keep doing that, adding a teaspoon of paint each time until you find where it won't properly spray through. You might have 6 teaspoons of paint and 3 teaspoons of thinner, and then finally it doesn't spray right. Well, obviously then you want to go back to 5 to 3 or 4 to 3. You can try and add a little bit of thinner to the over thick mixture to thin it back down, but even 1 teaspoon can be too much. What I do is I just properly dispose of that test mixture and remix it. I find for Rust-Oleum, black and white, 3 to 3 works great. But for something like the primer, which is a flat, you got to go up to 5 to 3. It just depends on the particular paint. But before you spray it, each test, you dump what you had in the airbrush out, and then pull it back and spray it onto a piece of paper, not out in the air, spray it onto a piece of paper and get it out, and then do it again, okay? So here is a video on thinning it, and I'm just going to talk on top of this, and let me, for all I know, it might work this time. If it works, tell me to shut up, but here we go. In this video, I want to show you how to dilute the paint with some paint thinner to get it to the proper consistency so that it will spray properly in the airbrush. I'm just going to use some Rust-Oleum because it's a very common paint, and I've always bought my paint in quarts, even though I don't use that much paint. It's so much cheaper by the quart that that's the way I always do it. First thing you want to do is to thoroughly stir the paint. Now I want you to see, you can see how thick this paint is when it runs off of this stick. And when I stir this, I am scraping carefully the bottom of the can to make absolutely sure that there's no pigment or any of the stuff down there in the bottom, stirring it to make sure that it's completely mixed. Now this was already mixed earlier, so it's not so bad. So now that it's mixed, I need to get some of it out of there so that I can add some paint thinner to it. What I do is I work in tablespoons. I got this measuring spoon set at a local store for about $2. Comes with about 5 different spoons, but a tablespoon is excellent. The teaspoon is great, and then also the half teaspoon is excellent. This one in particular is very, very good, okay? So what I'm going to do here is I'll take a bottle, and I find that these little bottles here that hold about 5 tablespoons of material, this is the ideal size for what we're doing here. You can buy these at craft stores, or you can buy them at art stores, surplus stores, and so on and so forth. Or you can get baby food jars, I suppose, from the supermarket. And what I'm going to do here is I am going to put first into it some mineral spirits. Mineral spirits is pretty much the same thing as paint thinner. I always just buy mineral spirits, even though my can here says paint thinner. And I buy this by the gallon, and then as I use it, I pour it into the quart can and only use it out of the quart can. When this gets low, I refill it. That cuts your cost considerably. So I poured some here into a little bottle, and I keep this around. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 2 tablespoons of this material and put it into this jar. You can see that this jar is big enough that I can get in there and get out a full tablespoon and get it right into the jar. There's 2 tablespoons of paint thinner. Then what I want to do is add to that, to start with, a 1-to-1 mixture is pretty good for this particular color and brand of paint. So I need to add to this 2 tablespoons of my carefully measured black paint. Now we got to wait here a little bit. It gets to be a little bit messy, but you can see that when you use the tablespoon, it's not so bad, okay? It doesn't make too much of a mess. Okay? And it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. That's pretty good. And then what I'll do is I'll wipe this off from the outside. No matter how you do it, it always seems like there's a little bit extra there, no matter what you do. But you can see I did that pretty well. And it's very important to keep the top of the paint bottle absolutely clean. If you don't keep that absolutely clean, when you put the lid on overnight, it will stick. Okay? All right? And now we'll simply stir it. Rather than shake it, I prefer to stir it. When you shake it, it gets all over the lid, it gets all over the inside of the bottle, and in general, we don't want that to happen. We just stir it there. And you can see now, when I pull it out, notice how much more easily, how much thinner it is. It flows very easily off of it. Now, depending on the particular paint, not just the brand, but the color as well, you might need to use more. What you do at this point is you take some of this and you put it into the airbrush and you try spraying it, and if it doesn't spray well, then you can add another tablespoon of thinner to it, mix it, and see how that works, okay, until you get a dilution that seems to be just right. Some paints require more. This is a Valspar red farm and implement paint, Massey Ferguson red, and after putting in 2 tablespoons of thinner and 2 tablespoons of the red paint, I found that wouldn't spray as well as I wanted. So I added 1 more tablespoon of thinner to it, so this is 3 parts paint thinner to 2 parts paint. If that still doesn't seem to work, you can try a little more. If you get it too thin, it runs. If it's too thick, it won't spray through. The other thing that you have to remember is to label your paints and label the dilution. Once you figure out what's a good dilution, you want to be sure to mark it on the bottle and mark the brand and color of the paint so that you don't have to go through that experimental process anymore. All right, how do you get it into the airbrush? And then we're going to do some spraying here, okay? I use these teaspoons. The airbrush has this little cup, and the little cup only holds about 1/4 of an ounce, but as you will see, that is actually a lot of paint. 1/4 ounce of paint actually goes a long way, as you're going to see. This is a really efficient process, okay? I just use a 1/2 teaspoon measuring spoon to mix the paint and load the paint into. Adding paint to your airbrush is quite easy. You need the airbrush and the color cup attached to it, which just shoves in on the underside there. You can put it on either side. And then you need some paint that you've already properly thinned. First thing you need to do, though, is to stir the paint, because the thin paint tends to settle out. Pigment tends to settle to the bottom, and so you need to stir it around so that any of the pigment that's on the bottom is stirred back into the paint. Don't shake it. If you put the lid on and shake it, it really just makes a mess in the end. Okay. Once you've got it properly stirred, take your airbrush with the color cup and simply spoon the paint into the color cup. It doesn't take much, maybe 2 or 3 little spoonfuls. This is a 1/2 teaspoon spoon. Doesn't take much. And that's all it takes. You don't want to overfill it, because if you overfill it, when you tilt it to spray, it'll come out. So you want to be sure not to overfill it. And that's it. All right, I think we're almost ready to spray here. The technique is that once you got the cup on here, you got your air plugged in, and you want to set it up to 20 pounds per square inch, and pushing down on the let's see if I can move my mouse arrow up here. Pushing down on the lever turns on the air. Pulling back turns on the paint and controls the amount of paint. You don't partially push down, it's either all on or all off, okay? And this is one of the things where a little practice doesn't hurt. I'm sure you got old cans, bottles, pieces of wood. There's all kinds of junk around the house you can practice spray painting on. In fact, this is mighty handy to have around the house. You can paint garden furniture with this and stuff like that. It's very, very handy, okay? So let's take a look at a video, I think, here. It's time we started painting with the airbrush. This is called a dual action airbrush because the air and the paint can be controlled separately. The air is turned off and on by pushing down on the lever here in the middle of the airbrush. But you'll notice that when I push down on it, there's no paint coming out. The amount of air is controlled by the setting on the compressor. You don't partially press down on the control here on the airbrush. It's either on or it's off. Usually the air pressure is kept at 20 pounds per square inch. You might turn it down when cleaning the airbrush or when working very close, but most of the time it's kept constant. The paint is controlled by how far you pull back on this lever. The farther you pull it back, the more paint comes out. If you don't pull it back at all, only air comes out. The air comes out of the airbrush and the paint come out in a cone. The closer you are to the tip, then the smaller is the spot produced. The further you are from the tip, the larger is the spot. I can come in here, point it at my little easel, turn the air on, and if I pull back just a little bit, I get a little spot there on the easel. I can move back further away, turn the air on, and pull back further and get a bigger spot. I can go back even further and pull back and get an even bigger spot. This is the beauty of it. You can get in and paint the head of a screw if you want. If you want to paint a large area like the side of a cabinet, you move back and open her up. You can cover a large area like that. If you missed a spot, you can come in, just barely turn it on, and just cover that little spot. You can even write your name. And you can obviously do much more complicated work. It's this ability to make a big area or a small area and control the amount of paint that makes the airbrush so great for working on equipment. I'm going to try and blow out all that's in this air cup here. You can see that this air cup actually holds quite a bit of paint. I didn't even have it full when I started here, but notice how much paint that I'm going to keep going here. I don't think I can use it all up. Okay? I don't think I can use it up there. Finally, the little cup holds quite a bit of paint. Now let's get to actually painting something. The part that you're going to paint should be held up off of the work surface. So you mount it on a piece of styrofoam or an extra piece of wood or something, just so that it's not touching the newspaper that you have underneath. Sometimes you have to hand hold it. The airbrush is so precise that you can spray part of the thing and not get the spray on your hands. It's not like a spray can which goes all over the place. Also, keep it moving and don't try to cover it in one coat. What is my biggest mistake? I spray too much paint, and if you spray enough paint, I don't care how thick it is, it's going to run. Do it in several coats. It's so easy to do it in several coats. Do it that way. Here, I'm going to paint a wooden block that I had. Let's try painting a small piece of wood that might be an antenna spreader or another part of an antenna or a feed line support or something like that. You should have the work up on something else to hold it so that you can move it around without touching the work itself. Okay, and we've got the red paint primed here, so let's just go after this. Don't try and put too much paint on it at one time. You want to have several coats, okay? And if it happens to move, well, we just kind of hold it there, and then we can hold it this way. But don't go too far. This one is being uncooperative. Okay, and then we can rotate it around like this and get the other side. We've got an uncooperative piece of wood here, so we'll just kind of hold it in position, and we can do the end here. Don't try and do it all in one coat. Okay, let's try and do this a little more. If you can fix it down some way, that's great. Otherwise, you might get a little bit on your hands. And that's actually looking pretty nice. Like I say, don't try and do it in more than in one coat. You want to be able to do it in several coats. And that looks like a real good first coat on that piece of wood. Now here's the one I had a lot of fun with. Okay, to show you how you can do a larger irregular surface. I think it goes without saying that when you're spray painting, if you can keep the surface flat, that you're painting, great, because then it won't run. But as you saw in the wood block, you can't do that. Okay, and that's where it's important to have the paint the right consistency. If it's too thin, it'll run, but you get it thick enough, it'll stay on there. When you paint anything, you got to make sure that it's cleaned. Any junk on it, any goop, glue, dirt, anything has got to be cleaned off. I just use the paint thinner and a paper towel and rub it down. Bare metal has to be primed. I just use the rusty metal primer. Any bare metal has to be primed with some sort of a metal primer. The primers are made so that they are thin. You don't want to, when you thin a primer, you have to add more primer than you do when you're just doing a regular enamel. So it's got to be like 5 to 3 or something thick to get enough. But it's made to be thinner so that it penetrates into any irregularities and sticks. But it's not real rugged. It's made, primers are made so that when you put the paint on top adheres to it real well, and the paint on top is the one that bears the load, okay? When you're painting irregular surfaces that might have ripples in them, there we go, which way am I going here? Because you're spraying, it's like a shadow effect. You have to be sure to spray from both sides so that if you've got a valley, that you spray both sides of the valley. So you got to spray from one side and then spray from the other side. And one thing that's a big, huge help is a turntable or a Lazy Susan. I bought one years ago specifically for airbrushing. I don't know where you can get them now, but again, art stores will have a turntable. A pottery shop might have a turntable, not a pottery wheel, but a turntable for carving or whatever. And again, don't try to cover in one coat. It's going to take several coats. So watch how I do this coffee can. This coffee can might be the microwave feed for a parabolic. Let's now paint something that's much larger and actually much more difficult to paint. This is a coffee can, and these are often used in microwave feeds with parabolic antennas, but it's a large, difficult object because none of the surfaces on the side are horizontal, they're vertical. Also, the bottom was raw metal, so I had to first spray a coat of a rusty metal primer onto that, and also I put a coat of primer around these beaded edges where there was bare metal. Alright, we're going to paint this black, and also I have this mounted on a Lazy Susan, which is a very handy device to have if you can find one or build one. So let's start by doing the top. Okay, we got our paint going here. Alright, and you always start the air first, and one of the things that you get into here that's difficult is what is called shadowing. This is because there's an uneven area here on the top, and it's like a little valley, and it's hard to get the paint down into that little valley, so you have to be sure that you spray from an angle where you can get down into that valley to get it coated. And don't overdo it, and then we can just fill in the center section here like that. And that's probably good enough at the moment to do the top. Then we can work on the sides. Now here we just back off a little bit, and we can just use the table to go around like this. And I'm not trying to get everything done with one coat. I'm going to try and do several coats. Again, there are valleys here, so I have to be sure that I get into those valleys. And you'll notice how far this one paint cup is going. I'm going to run out in a little bit here. But you can see how the Lazy Susan really helps things. And we just ran out of paint there. So let's pause, let's let things keep running. Okay, here we pick it up again. And we'll just go right down to the bottom there. And this paint is just about thin, just right, okay? This particular paint is thin just right, and I don't think I can get much more on there. Oh, I see a spot here and there, but notice how I can just come and just touch a little spot. That's something that's very hard to do with a spray can of paint. You can just come in, and if you see a spot that isn't quite right, you can just hit it a little bit, but don't overdo it. That's my biggest problem, is I spray too much and I wind up with the paint running. I think I hit it just right here. The top looks good. I might hit it right where the numbers are here. Just hit them a little bit to get a little extra paint there where the numbers are in the middle. And I think that's it. Okay, and I mean this is the way to go. And finally, I'll finish up the talk here. Doing something you're very likely to do as a ham, and that is painting a flat panel. And in this case, you don't want the panel vertical, you want the panel flat, obviously. Okay. Once again, a turntable is a great help. Be sure that it's thoroughly cleaned. Don't try and just spray it in one pass. You can go down and sort of get an initial coat on, then you can hit it again and eventually work your way all the way down. It should go without saying that don't do this on a critical piece of equipment until you've practiced a little bit. There's all kinds of junk around the house you can spray paint. Practice on it until you got something critical. Don't attempt one coat. And as you're going to see here, you can see that how I paint the edges of this panel by moving in and spray the very edge of the aluminum sheet. Now, technically, this piece of aluminum should have been primed, but I was in a hurry here to let you see how to do a panel, and so I didn't bother to prime it, but technically it should have been primed. So here we go, painting a flat panel. Here I have a piece of sheet aluminum. Technically this should be primed first, but I just want to show you the technique of doing a flat panel. One thing that you must do whenever you're priming or painting anything is to be sure to thoroughly clean it. I wiped this down thoroughly with paint thinner to make sure that there was no wax or any other thing on it that could impede the adherence of the paint. We've got it again here on the turntable, and let's make sure our airbrush is working okay. And we'll just start here on the edge, and you don't have to get it all as dense as you want right away. You can take several times here, and for something like this I can even do it crossways. This has got some impurities on it, but I just grabbed it and didn't really clean it as well as I could. But whenever you do something like this, which is flat, you want to do it horizontally like this so that the paint will level out. I can spray the edges here. This is why the turntable is so nice. I can just spray that edge there. And you're not going to get it in one coat, and this is not going to be very good because this thing probably should have been sanded a little bit, but it's getting there. And I can maybe hit it with a little more here. The nice thing is if you find an area that isn't quite to your liking, you can come right in on it and just barely go right near that. You can come in and you don't have to open the paint up very far. And also this is gloss paint, and usually if you're going to do a black panel you want to use flat paint, but gloss is what I happen to have on hand here for this demonstration, and I think that's about as far as I can realistically go. I might just give it a final touch up like that, and we're done. So that pretty much covers it. I mean, you can see what you can do with this thing. It's just utterly amazing, the kinds of things you can paint. But the last thing I'll do before showing you a couple of examples of radio work is cleaning it. I know a lot of us are not very good on cleaning things, okay? We're kind of poor on that. But in this case, you have to clean the brush right away. If you're going to leave it more than 10 minutes, if you're going to lunch, then you have got to close shop for the brush as far as it's concerned, because if the paint starts to harden in the brush, you're going to have a devil of a time cleaning it. It can be cleaned, but you're going to see that it is such a simple job to clean this. It's a heck of a lot simpler than trying to clean the paint out of a paintbrush. I hate cleaning paintbrushes, but you're going to see that this is so slick and easy that there's no reason not to do it, okay? To clean it, you need a small empty bottle over which you can hold the paint cup and spray it out. A small bottle almost full of paint thinner, and that paint thinner can be slightly used, as you're going to see here. You can use that quite a bit. The bottle that the paint came out of, and an airbrush bottle with clean, fresh paint thinner in it. That's why I said to get that extra 3-ounce bottle. You can use the small bottle that comes with the kit, that works too, but a bigger one is mighty handy, okay? So here is what you do. You're not going to believe how slick this is. Cleaning your airbrush is very easy. This should be done whenever you are finished or whenever you have to switch over to another color of paint. You should never leave the paint sitting in the airbrush for more than maybe 5 or 10 minutes. That's it. If you're going to go out to lunch, you do not leave the paint sitting in the airbrush. You need to clean it so you can start fresh and new. You'll need several things to help clean it up. You'll need the bottle that came with the airbrush with fresh mineral spirits in it. I use a larger bottle, okay, but with fresh mineral spirits in it. You need the paint container. You need a bottle about this size, as you can see over here, that is empty. We're going to use that when we clean the color cup. And then you need a bottle with paint thinner in it that is big enough that you can immerse the head of the airbrush and the paint inlet all at the same time down into that. All right. This can be used over and over. It doesn't have to be absolutely purely fresh mineral spirits. It can be used multiple times. First, never remove the color cup from the airbrush until you have flushed out any paint that remains inside the system. The first thing to do is to simply empty out any paint that remains in the color cup. All right? Like that. Okay? Then, get that out of the way, we want to spray out any paint that is left. We want to spray it until air comes out. All right? Don't do that when you're spraying your work, because it sputters at the end and you don't want that sputtered paint to get onto your work. Once you've done that, now you can remove the color cup. Once you've done that, you take the airbrush and immerse it into the paint thinner, but before you do that, cut back on your air pressure. You want to cut your air pressure down to about 5 pounds per square inch. You want to cut back on the air pressure, and that's a little bit too low. So I got about 5 pounds of pressure. Then you immerse the head of this into this paint, and I have a piece of foil here, and then you want to put it in and blow the air through and pull that lever back and forth. Okay, this is to help keep the stuff from going all over the place. And what that does is it flushes the paint thinner all through the airbrush. Then you can spray that out. Alright? Alright. I like to use little quarter squares of paper towel when I'm working on stuff like this. Next, you attach your bottle of mineral spirits, and you take your empty bottle here, and you now use the airbrush, and we got to turn our air pressure higher up again. I'm about 15, and then I take the color cup and I use the airbrush as a spray cleaner, and I flush out any of the paint that is in the color cup. I also spray it backwards through the paint tube. I want to get every last little lick of paint out of that, and this also flushes fresh paint thinner through the airbrush. Alright? When you don't see any more paint coming out of the color cup, you can take another piece of paper towel and you can dry that off, and that's cleaner almost than brand new. And then you can take your airbrush and again spray out whatever solvent is left in there, and you're good to go. Finally, I'll finish with this, just about on time. these are a couple of the things that I've sprayed with this. There's so many things that I've used the airbrush for. I make miniature steam engines and use it for that. But for radio work, this is the cabinet of my Ranger that I talked about last time. And for this, I mixed 2 parts of black gloss, 1 part of white gloss Rust-Oleum, mix, mix, mix. Then I thinned it down 1 to 1 and I sprayed the whole cabinet with it. And then in the scene over here, I masked off the entire chassis and used the black enamel to spray the transformers while they were still attached to the chassis. I sprayed those while they were still attached. I had to come underneath here and mask off everything here, but I did these in place. And I think that's everything I wanted to say. So do we have any questions there?